From who pruned Loki to who was calling to Loki, to the importance of Renslayer, to so much more, we got a ton of answers in Loki Season 2, Episode 4, titled Heart of the TVA. Welcome back to Fantasy Theory. Today we are breaking down this episode from start to finish because this episode was great. I had a few nitpicks here and there, but overall the episode was yet another great installment of the Loki series and continues to prove why Loki is on top of all Marvel shows. The show has only 2 more episodes and I legitimately have no idea where this show is going after this ending, but hey, I'm here for the ride. Before we start, let me know if any of your theories came true. Let's jump into it. This week's episode, the opening Marvel title card gets cut short and we get right into the episode. The green Marvel Studios logo is thrown towards us and we are put into the surging sacred timeline that this episode is all about. I want to point out that I may be reaching here, but this is kind of an inverse of Loki Season 1 Episode 6. The beginning title card seems to be playing sounds from the MCU at a normal pace, where in this episode they play sounds that I assume are from the MCU. No way we can make this out at such a speedy pace. Maybe symbolizing how in Episode 6 there was a major shift in the MCU, and in this episode there is another major shift. But we'll talk about that later. I want to know if you guys have any theories on this and what these sounds could be. As we know in Marvel, most of the time things are not just randomly put without any explanation, so I want to know what we think these sounds could possibly be. It goes right into the end of time where we left off in the last episode, and as we see, it is no longer in order, where we see all the branches of the timeline surrounding the Citadel. We get to reveal Miss Minutes said to Renslayer in the last episode, the secret that will make Renslayer very angry. It's weird to me to see how quick Miss Minutes turns on Victor. Like Renslayer, we see why she doesn't like Victor because he left her last episode, but Miss Minutes, he only shut her off for the time being after she creepily professed her love for him. I guess that could be the reason, but still seems like something is off. Miss Minutes projects the secret from what I assume is a long time ago. Maybe the end of the multiversal war as a miniature version of it. Now, if you don't remember, the multiversal war is a Kang fight between a bunch of other Kang variants and their timelines. Eventually, the Kang variant, He Who Remains, wins, with the help of Renslayer commanding his army and the created TVA to keep order in it being the timeline. But back to now, Miss Minutes shows a kind of dollhouse version of the aftermath of this battle. It's He Who Remains in Renslayer. They're speaking the same thing we heard back in Loki Season 2 Episode 1 when Loki played the tape recording on the wall in the TVA. Now, why would something so important be just on the wall of the TVA for anyone to play? Maybe Miss Minutes planted it there? Or maybe He Who Remains planted it? I don't know, to be honest. He Who Remains thanks Renslayer for being on his team and says he would be proud to lead with her. As we know from Victor Timely, he does not do partnerships, so he lets Renslayer leave and brings up Miss Minutes. Miss Minutes asks if he wants to play a game of chess, and as we saw in the last episode, she was created simply for this reason. So this might be a really early version of her. But then He Who Remains brings up Protocol 42 and erase not just Renslayer's memory, but all the army's memories. Kind of like a Palpatine Execute Order 66 vibe to it. Renslayer is furious at this, and her and Miss Minutes decide to band together and take over the TVA, saying they may never have needed him. In the last episode, Victor Timely jumped through the door to go to the TVA, and we see him come out the other side in this episode, coming out of his face pretty much. He walks around the TVA for a small amount of time until Loki, Mobius, and Sylvie find him. Victor sees the wall art of the 3 timekeepers. Now, my theory after meeting OB and speculating that he was around during the creation of the TVA, 3 timekeepers were based off real people. One being He Who Remains, the other being OB, and finally the last one being Renslayer. The 3 founders of the TVA. Just a theory, but it does seem to make a lot of sense. He Who Remains being the Kang variant who won the war, OB writing the TVA book, and Renslayer leading the army. Let me know what you think of this theory below. Loki says to Victor that his loom is the only thing that could save the TVA. Victor just responds, la-di-da. B-15 and Judge Gamble speak about all the TVA agents that were pruning other timelines. Judge Gamble says to B-15 to forgive them, that they need all the help that they can get. Kind of a small theme of this series has been forgiveness, I've noticed. Like how Loki was forgiven by us for being an anti-hero all this time and how people can change. The show then pushes the frame to focus on the TVA monitor that shows the loom is unstable, and there are a lot more lines signifying branches on the monitor, showcasing the ongoing threat that is happening. We will later see in the episode B-15 gives the group a choice to help the TVA. Choices is a big theme in this episode, as well as the whole show. But this episode specifically, we see B-15 give them a choice, and later Renslayer will give them a choice, but we'll talk about that soon. We cut to the shot of the hot chocolate machine that will ultimately start the whirl of events, but not quite yet. We said in the last breakdown that when Obi and Victor meet, it will be a great scene, and it was. When they meet, they find out that both of their work works is based off one another. Victor based his work on Obi, and Obi based his work on Victor. Mobius asks who came first, posing a question that I have no answer to. And Obi says, kind of like a snake eating its own tail. Another theme of this episode and the whole show is that circle, that circular whirl. I also want to point out that Victor's TVA book is much darker and worn out than Obi's TVA book. So either Obi has a new one or he just knows how to keep his stuff in great condition. What's interesting here is that Obi remembers the name Victor timely, even though He Who Remains wiped everyone's memory. So how does Obi remember that? The whole timeline of events is a little wonky, especially when you throw Obi in the mix, because he seems to remember not everything in the TVA, but some things, and some things he doesn't know. I don't know if this is just a mess up on the show's part or if there is a deeper question and answer here about Obi in the beginning of the TVA. They want each other to sign each other's book. And we hilariously again see Casey in the background, maybe trying to work up the courage to get his book signed as well. Funny little detail about Casey, because I don't know if he ever got his book signed by Obi, like how we mentioned in the last episode. Obi shows his not to scale diorama, and he emphasizes that this is not done when Mobius says it's good. A reference to Back to the Future, which is a pretty funny scene because this show's time travel is based off Back to the Future. He walks him through it and he says he didn't have time to finish the paint and make actual figurines of everyone, but when did he have time to even put this whole thing together? Better yet, who was he planning on sending to the loom machine? When he tells him what to do, Casey says to hit the green button and emphasizes the green button. I wonder at the end of it if there was another colored button. We don't know because, well, what happens to Victor, but again, we'll get to it. Obi brings up how the branches were created, and that is a direct result of someone killing He Who Remains. And I quote, he says, "Ruined my life." Sylvie smiles and almost nods at Victor when Victor looks at her almost a little horrified. When Victor proposes a small partnership to Obi and shakes his hand, we know by Sylvie's look that something seems off. As Victor stated, he doesn't do partnerships, and that's been established. So why is he willing to work with Obi? Either he had something else planned in the long run, or he respects Obi that much that he's willing to partner up with him. Unfortunately, we never know because, again, we know what happens to Victor later. This season has harped on Mobius a few times and why he's not really concerned with his life he had outside of the TVA. For example, when Brad brought up this a few episodes ago and why Sylvie brings it up now, Sylvie brings up how he is not concerned about all these other timelines when he suggests to relax and have some pie. She says to him it doesn't matter to him if a few lines disappear on that monitor because he's never bothered to look to see if any of them were his. The question is, why doesn't he care? Why doesn't he care to see his life outside the TVA? We know this may be a touchy subject to him based off slapping Brad a few episodes ago, but he really doesn't try and find this out. Is it too overwhelming for him? A few posters in the pie room read, "Bring your own cup and only one pie per week." Weird rules in the TVAs, like, is there a store in the TVA they can just get a cup at, or what? Are they just supposed to have a cup when they get to the TVA? Loki speaks to Sylvie, basically recapping Thor 1, where Thor was banished from Asgard and came back a changed and better man and God, a stronger man and God, a more worthy man and God. The story here is that people can change. Again, change, another theme in the show. But basically he brings the story up to show that this Victor may not be the same as He Who Remains, and they have to hope for a few things, like this, the TVA to turn good, that Victor will not turn into He Who Remains. But she claims doing this is kind of like playing God, where Loki responds, "We are gods." Now, this is a changed Loki, so I don't believe this is him saying this like a proud, devious god that he once was, but rather a god who is for the people and not evil, a god who puts his hope and faith into mortals and a regular person. And here's the choice we highlighted earlier. Renslayer comes to the prison cell and offers General Dox, her and her squad, a choice to join her in restoring the TVA to her vision or death, promising them an individual life on the timeline, just how Kang or Miss Minutes offered Loki and Sylvie in the last season in the last episode. They all deny except Brad, and then we get the cruel scene that Miss Minutes enjoyed way too much. They turn on the time cube and they start to shrink the cube with everyone who opposed them in it. We do not see them shrink, but we just stay on X5's face, Brad's face. He is horrified and cannot even look at what's happening to them, while on the other hand, Miss Minutes, the most evil character in this show so far, is absolutely loving this. We could see on her face the biggest smile that she's had. You have to remember, Renslayer is doing all of this for her control now. She doesn't care about the TVA unless she's in charge of it, unless she is the head of the TVA. She does not want to serve another He Who Remains. I guess after seeing that she was supposed to lead with He Who Remains, that she did all of the work and he took all of the credit. B-15 walks in, I assume minutes after this happens, and we hear the terrifying drops of what I assume to be their blood from being crushed. Now remember when I said the Coco machine will be the start of the spiral of events? Well, here we go. Victor gets so interested in the fact that they have a Coco machine that he must see it. So after a little banter, they have D90 take him to the machine. He gets D90 to try the hot cocoa, and then when D90 is trying it, he gets pruned by X5, Brad. When they find the spilled cocoa, Loki says Renslayer is not after Victor, but instead after the TVA, confirming she is power hungry now and does not want to serve He Who Remains. X5 brings Victor to the war room where Renslayer and Miss Minutes are. I want to point out that when they are talking to him, he kind of loses his stutter. I don't know if that's on purpose or if he's been pretending this whole show or this whole time, or when he's under the pressure, he shines the best, kind of like when he was on stage giving the presentation last episode. The show now starts to get even more crazy. If these settings start to look a little familiar to you, it's because they should be. This was the same setting as Loki episode 1, where we remember Sylvie in the elevator, the blinking lights, panicking by the TVA agents, and so much more. Now stay with me on this. This will start to make sense, I promise. Current Loki is wearing a jacket, and the Loki in episode 1 was wearing just his shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and we could see he had a cut on his arm. The next scene we see is this Loki, the Loki from the past, but this was also the Loki from the future. Time travel, man. We are now following the past Loki, episode 1 Loki. Loki and Sylvie meet up at the elevator when we saw her prying it open in episode 1. The phone ringing, lights flashing, the same exact scene from episode 1. Only we are seeing this from the point of view of our current Loki in the jacket. And then we get the answer we had since week 1. Who pruned Loki? The answer? Loki. Remember, Loki had to prune himself at that exact moment to stop the time slipping. Turns out future Loki, who is current Loki, pruned past Loki. It makes sense if you really think about it, but it's also funny to point out that Sylvie doesn't seem to question this one bit when he prunes him. And also, as we know, the phone was ringing, so who was it? I know there was theories of Thor, I know there was theories of Loki. The answer? It was Obi. Obi was calling it. It makes sense, but I was expecting more, to be honest. They decide to reboot the TVA that will allow Loki and Sylvie to use their powers, as well as shut down Miss Minutes, who was basically controlling everything going on that was bad for Loki and friends. When Miss Minutes realizes she is being shut down, she starts to glitch. She starts to glitch, shudder, and basically do everything frustrating when your computer doesn't work. Victor even thinks she's mocking him because of the stutter, because he doesn't really know what that means for computers. Also, he does stutter here after not stuttering this whole scene. Did he just remember to stutter at this moment, or am I, thinking too much into this? Let me know. When she officially just shuts down, she comes back for a split second to get some final words out to Victor, saying, and I quote, "You'll never be him," and then she shuts down officially. I have to note when she glitches, her words glitch as well as her picture. When she officially shuts down, she becomes translucent with the number 1s and 0s all over her, her eyes being big X's to symbolize that she's off or dead, and finally when she comes back, some of her is glitched and some of her is present. Most notably, her one eye is missing, and she somehow gets even more creepier than when she was on the mannequin. That may be up for debate, but you let me know. When she disappears, a floppy disk appears on screen saying the system will shut down to prevent damage. So she'll be back, I assume, before the season ends. An excellent placement where she is. When she disappears after saying what she said to Victor, the statue on the wall of He Who Remains' face is directly behind her, aligning with Miss Minutes. It was a cool visual. Victor now has to look at He Who Remains after hearing he will never actually be him. A pretty harsh cut for him, and kind of the reason why he will take on this hero role later in the episode. Sylvie enchants Brad for a minute, just enough time to prune Renslayer and save Victor. So rebooting the TVA proved to help even more, since Sylvie and Loki can now use their powers. They rush Victor to scan his face in the machine, which he asks, is it safe? Let me tell you, he's asking the right question at the wrong time. He was asking if the wrong thing was safe, because then he volunteers to go outside to the loom. He most likely had no idea the extent of what could happen outside of the walls, but hey, it happens, I guess. He then suits up and goes outside, and the second he comes outside, he gets spaghettified and dies. Yep, just like that. Done. You should have seen my face when this happened. I was like shocked. This ultimately dooming the TVA, Loki, and basically everyone in every timeline? I think. The spaghettification kind of reminds me of what Wanda did to Reed Richards in Doctor Strange 2, but Victor's looked a little more thinner, like thinner spaghetti than John Krasinski's Reed Richards. May have no relation, but I just wanted to point that out. The loom begins to expand and sends the radiation towards all of them. Loki and everyone looks horrified. Tom Hiddleston does an incredible job selling the fear on his face, yet again, like how we saw him selling the fear on his face when he first saw He Who Remains, Victor Timely. He says he does not know. The first time we see Loki in this episode, unsure and almost not have any hope or faith that everything will be okay. The light gets brighter and brighter, and bright enough where Loki has to shield his eyes, and then the episode turns to black and the credits roll. This show could go anywhere. There's still trailer footage that we haven't seen yet, so maybe somehow everyone gets out of this. Maybe we kind of see an afterlife for all of them. I really don't know. As we know, this show leads into Deadpool, Kang Dynasty, and Secret Wars. I don't believe this is the last of these characters, obviously, but it's cool to speculate what will happen. We know Marvel has teased a reunion with Thor and Loki. We've seen the trailer footage, and we know there's 2 more episodes, so this basically can't be the end. Another thing I want to bring up, do you think this was all part of He Who Remains' plan? He's a smart character, obviously, and he would have taken into account what would happen if Renslayer found out that he made her forget, or if Miss Minutes turned rogue. He had to have had more backup plans, or this had to be part of his plan. Maybe Victor's gone, there has to be some type of plan still in effect by He Who Remains. I want to know what you guys thought. Did these questions asked in episode 1 live up to expectations, or were you pleasantly surprised, or were you PO'd with these answers? Give me your predictions of next episode and the last episode, because I'll be reading the comments because I am so intrigued after watching this episode. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you all in the next one. Have a great day.